provided, of course, he's willing to see me. So, yes, come ahead. So I went to upstate New York, and I had one of the most fantastic visits with my brother I've had in my entire life. I guess we're getting old enough so that, the sort of sibling rivalries and problems. When I was a little boy, I used to tell him, I told him once, I said, the trouble with you is you're so sure of yourself. And he turned to me and he said, and so are you. Well, touche. But at any rate, this was the best visit I've ever had with him. And we talked more or less nonstop for several days. But one of the things that really sort of shocked me, he said, I'm writing letters to my children, which are to be sealed and not to be opened until after I'm dead. And I said to him, Bob, what in the world would you say in a letter like that? Because all I can think of is, I've talked to my children off and on for all their lives. What would I have to say in a letter that they weren't to open until after I was dead? Outside of maybe, you'll find the key to the secret deposit box. What do you say? What would you say if you were going to write a letter to your children or to your friends or to your loved ones that they weren't to open until after you were dead? Haven't you talked to them about your feelings? Or haven't you shared with them? Well, Bob said to me, I want to write the letter to them that I wish my father had written to me. And I suddenly realized how bitter my brother was at our father. Well, as you know, I have been working on my own life story for a number of years now. And let me share with you a couple pages I wrote several years ago, actually, when I was writing about my father. I grew up in a family where there was a Holy Trinity. My father, my mother, and my Aunt Gladys. So I had 3 adults in our house from the time I was born until the time I left home. And even after that, until finally all of them died. So in this section of my magnum opus, I'm writing, in my Trinity, my father's part was to a child far less obvious than that of my mother and aunt. My memories of him circle around images of daily routine, of family rituals that seemed immutable. Before he left for work every morning, there was breakfast in the dining room. We were all gathered, and where he presided at the head of the table, his usual position. His breakfast was almost always the same: bacon, fried eggs, toast, orange juice freshly squeezed by my mother, and coffee. At the end of the day, the same ritual with a different menu was repeated. He returned between 5 and 6 in the evening, gave my mother a kiss on her cheek, gave me the comic section from the newspaper, and after washing up, took his place once again at the head of the table, ready to be served. He never had anything to do with preparation of meals, nor the cleanup afterwards. In fact, he rarely entered the kitchen. The additional ritual at dinner was the serving of coffee in demi-tasse cups, while we participated, sometimes for a long period, in conversation. The discussion could become quite heated. My father's voice would become almost a shout, particularly if we were talking about FDR, whom my father seemed to regard as almost a personal enemy. My mother could be vehement too, and although she shared my father's allegiance to the Republican Party, tended to be more liberal, supporting and campaigning for Wendell Willkie in 1940, for example. My father's temper could be volcanic, and guests who sometimes witnessed these after-dinner conversations could be put off. What strikes me now is that we all, even as children, did not feel excluded, but welcome to participate if we had the nerve. What these rituals and their regularity contributed to my childhood, I now realize, was a sense of order and stability. The world doesn't change. It's the same year in, year out. What I missed as a child was a sense that he loved me. Indeed, it is only as an adult that I've fully come to understand his love and how difficult he found expressing it to me. My father followed the pattern of adult males of his day. He was the breadwinner for whom domesticity and child rearing were the domain of the little woman. To be sure, none of the three physically demonstrated their affection in my memory. Hugs were rare, although they must have been more common when we were very small. But no memory of them comes to my mind now. Perhaps I would not single out my father as particularly reticent and aloof in this regard, had he been as verbally affectionate as my mother and my aunt were. I cannot remember any physical contact between us, except for the manly handshake exchanged on my return from a trip. And I remember no words expressive of love for me that he ever uttered. I cannot remember he ever voluntarily picking or holding any child. My mother once told my wife that indeed he did love me. And as I reread his letters to me now, I recognize that they do express a love. My mother frequently talked of money difficulties, how little my father allowed her to care for our daily needs. My image of him was thus of a man very frugal with money, an image reinforced by, for example, his instructions to my sisters, that when they went to church, they were to put $1 in the collection plate, not each, but together. But his letters contained frequent references to his concern about my well-being, with offers of financial support. During my first year of graduate study, for example, concerned about my meager funds limiting my diet, he offered to loan me money to pay living expenses to be repaid once I had a degree and employment. Another letter finds him sending me $50 because an expected tax refund had been delayed. All contained good advice, and one rescued me at a time I was questioning my future in academia. He wrote, "I do think you should take the year in Greece before deciding what profession or work you will follow. We think you would make an excellent teacher, and if this is to be your field, by all means go on to your final degree. On the other hand, if you're not to follow teaching, the sooner you switch, the better. Unless you're mathematically inclined, however, I doubt if the investment field is the one for you." And he said, "Your math is poor." Oh, Leonard, we will be glad to help you in any possible way at any time. He signed the letter, as he always did, "Love, Dad." He found it possible to write the word which he could not say out loud. My great regret now is that I never recognized his love before he died, and thus was never able to express a reciprocal love for him. I was very good at that age at observing the details of our family life, but unable to understand fully the true feelings of my parents for one another and for us children. I treasured those times that he took me to see his beloved Cincinnati Reds play my beloved St. Louis Cardinals. So there were times when we went and did things together. Why didn't I recognize the love behind these details? Now at last, I think I understand the great contribution to me and to our family that his love made. The world of my family was stable, secure, unchanging, and permanent. And that was his contribution. It was a love which, as I say, was hard for us as children to understand. I obviously came ultimately to understand it. My brother has not. Even though when my brother was diagnosed with Hodgkin's disease, it was my father who insisted upon bringing him to Barnes Hospital in St. Louis and securing the best medical treatment possible. And my brother is still alive at 92. So again, there is this problem in our relationship with each other. There is this problem of reading hearts. It's not as easy as we sometimes think it might be. And how does this lesson apply to that? Well, again, that's why we have the Pharisees. Why didn't the Pharisees see Jesus for who he was? Because they expected that the one that the Lord was sending would respond in the way they expected the Lord to respond. He wouldn't heal on the Sabbath if he was the Lord. They were looking for the hugs and the kisses and the verbal expressions of love. And they didn't get it because the Pharisees were concerned this is the traditional way we do these things. And then there's another problem that the story illustrates, and that is the problem of the Pharisees perhaps did not accept as central, as important, this relationship, this tie of heart to heart that Jesus did. And consequently, they were unable to see that they didn't see. They thought they had sight. And that's why at the end, Jesus says, that's why they are sinners. They claim to know about love when they actually don't know about it. They don't value it in the same way. The story, again, for me, has all these metaphorical reverberations which tie to me. This is my story. This speaks to me directly. This is one of the central stories in my understanding of what it means to be a Christian. And what's central in it is that, again, it's not about abstractions. The blind man doesn't see, oh, I now see love is important. What he sees, I now see you're important. And consequently, it's not very helpful for us to say God is love. We've got to say to one another, you're important. You're the one that's significant. You're the one that brings to life the story of Jesus as I understand it. I hope I can leave you with something to digest. But at any rate, that's my suggestion, is that we have this tremendous treasury of stories that help to illustrate and bring to life our own story, and help us to realize its central meaning. And it's a treasure not to be tossed aside lightly. It is something that should bring us back over and over again, even if it's only while you're sitting in church and listening to a gospel sermon. You can be thinking about how wonderful my interpretation of this passage is. It gives you something to while away the time with. Anyway, thank you very much, and I hope